Yeah, so sit in a good posture for a moment. um, there was a couple of things that I felt like talking about. Yesterday in my speech I talked about the elements of the mind, the 5 elements, and then the 6th one that is in the background and is actually penetrating all these 5 elements. And yesterday afternoon we were talking with John about and with others out there in the garden about this crucial matter of being able to differentiate mind, subtle mind, from awareness or the nature of mind. Just for, if you don't know, mind is like a sem. It's sem is Tibetan, and mind, it refers to the deluded mind, dualistic mind, while the term nature of mind refers to sem yid, which is like the natural state. And actually when we, in the Vimalamitra Semjin, there is also Semjin. That Sem is from Sem Yid, which is the nature of mind, the natural state. So yeah, I was thinking of this. Dzogchen masters, they remind often in the classics, in texts, they remind how important it is to be able to recognize the deep subconscious mind, substrate consciousness, and awareness. Just like what I was talking about yesterday, that these layers, this dullness, subtly bored mind, it's kind of cozy and no thoughts there, but that's not awareness. So this is something that Dzogchen masters like Jigme Lingpa and Longchenpa often underline. And actually, I don't remember which text, but Jigme Lingpa somewhere says that if one is not able to differentiate two, even very like a dedicated practitioners, people who practice for decades, can sit in that blank dullness for decades while thinking or believing that that's Buddha nature. And I have a story about this, a personal story, which is a bit tragical from the Dharma practice point of view. When I was in the temple in Japan, I got to know this American elder Zen monk whose name was Shunko. He doesn't mind me telling about this name because he's dead already. So Shunko was a nice guy. Back then, like prior to 2005 when I was there, he had been practicing for 35 years and had been ordained monk for 35 years. And he had gotten ordained by Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. Shunryu Suzuki, who's the famous writer of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And also the name Shunko comes from Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. So Shunko, throughout the years, he trained and got to know personally all the pioneers of American Zen, all the big names. I remember, it's been a long time, of course, since I heard this, but he told me that he had been a personal assistant and a student of Robert Aitken Roshi, who was one of the very first in the US who started Zen and became teachers in a Japanese Zen Buddhist lineage. And then, every one of the first generation of American Zen Buddhists knew who Shunko was. He was like one of the first ones, and Shunko was also like Shunryu Suzuki started the San Francisco Zen Center, and Shunko was one of the first students there. So he was like a bit of a legend, really. And he also lived in Japan for a long time, maybe over 20 years. He studied with Shodo Harada Roshi, who was also my teacher in the same temple, and he studied with Tangen Harada. Tangen Harada Roshi, who was known as, he's actually still alive, but already back then he was known as the old Buddha, because he was a really wonderful Zen master. I also went to meet him. So Shunko, he passed away about a year and a half ago, around the Christmas and New Year of 2016, about a year and a half ago. And he was already 70 something years old, but of course it comes, death of someone who one knows, sometimes comes as a surprise, and it was a surprise to people who knew Shunko, also to me, because he was just one of those guys who kind of is always, you expect that person always to be there. But he was living in Kyoto, Japan at the time with one other monk friend who I got to know in Japan, and the other friend, he was visiting somewhere for a week or so, and during that time when Shunko was staying at the temple, around the New Year time, he had passed away in his bed. I think he had a flu or a pneumonia or something like that, and he had just died in his bed. And this friend monk found him when he arrived a couple of days later. So I've helped and seen, like my father passed away 7 years ago this month, and I helped him in his passing, which was wonderful. I simply asked the masters to help him. I went to his bedside and prayed for him that he wouldn't get lost in all the intermediate states and bardo states, and because of his karmic traces, wouldn't be pushed by the karmic winds to take a rebirth in some place that is unfortunate. There are many such places. In Buddhism, there is the general explanation of the 6 realms and 6 realms of samsara. So they are like lower realms or middle realms or higher realms, but all of these are samsaric. So it doesn't really matter if you're an angel or a demon because you're caught in the wheel, right? So, and simply put, the way out of the wheel is to recognize one natural state and or depend on those who are outside the wheel. In other words, the Buddhas and masters, Mahasiddhas. So I mentioned, was it yesterday at some point, that Pure Land Buddhists, do you remember that? I mentioned Pure Land Buddhists who are very much devoted to Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of light. And also they wish to be reborn when they die. They wish to go to Amitabha's Pure Land, which is Sukhavati. Sukha means like a pleasant or happy, like this subtle realm of happiness and joy. So like this, in Zen Buddhism there is no really the element of devotion. They don't depend on the help of Shakyamuni Buddha or Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva or Manjushri Bodhisattva or any of these Buddha figures or masters, even though they read these names and all these dharanis, these short prayers every day. But they don't really depend on external force or external factor. In Japanese there is this term joriki, which means to depend on one's own power. Joriki, depend on oneself, one's own power. While there is another Japanese term, tariki, which means to depend on external force. So in Zen, they are all about their own force, their own abilities, their own life force, and working with that. There's a lot of determination in Zen Buddhism, especially Rinzai school. So yesterday we were talking about this issue of sitting in the mud, sitting in the dullness, and wasting retreat after retreat, and year after year, and thousands of hours sitting there in that dull blankness. And so when I heard about the death of Shunko, because I had helped my father and then helped a few other people, sometimes people ask me that when somebody close to them dies, they ask me if I could help that deceased person somehow. And of course I help because I know how to do that. And it's actually not that more complex than to pray for a master or a Buddha whom you feel devotion towards, to take care of them. And when you do that, when you say that prayer, you can kind of be aware and observe if that actually happens. So I got the news of Shunko's passing, and it had been probably a week or two after he had died. And I went to meditation and felt like maybe there is something I could do and help. And I found him. I was able to detect his vibration somewhere, and he was, if any one of you have seen the music video of the band called Massive Attack, they have this song called Teardrop, this ballad, Teardrop. And in the music video there is this fetus, unborn fetus that is floating in the water, like in a womb. So seeing Shunko was exactly like that. He was floating in this subconscious state, not at all clear. So fetus, like a baby in a fetus, he's of course fine, but Shunko was in a bardo. He was caught in a bardo, in this really dull, gray, dull state. So, like, he was somehow not at all recognizing awareness itself. Even though he had practiced for 40 years plus, because he hadn't received proper instructions, he was in that problematic situation. And so I tried to wake him up, kind of, well, you don't have a physical hand to slap, but kind of push him and slap him and wake up, you know, you're dreaming there, you're in a this messy condition, but he was kind of floating there and not being able, kind of, when I tried to slap him, he was like, but not really recognizing it. Like drunkards, when they are passed out, we have a lot of drunkards in Finland. So if you go and try to wake them up, it takes a while for them to kind of open their eyes, and they might be hearing when they have passed out. They might be a little bit hearing when somebody is shouting next to their ear, hearing a little bit, registering a little bit, but it's not really getting registered. So that was the unfortunate condition of his, and I tried to do everything, but it also felt to me like, because he had, you know, he was a wonderful guy, a really nice guy, but he had this really samurai warrior mentality. He was ordained in the Soto Zen tradition, which is usually kind of more calm and low-key than the Rinzai. Rinzai Zen Buddhists are like a really loud and dramatic compared to Soto anyway. But like, I assume that because of the poor instructions he had received, and because he relied so much on his own, this created a condition where he was just lost after death. And I was saying to John yesterday that in that case, it would have actually been better if a person would have been a devout Christian, because and believed in God instead of being atheist like Buddhists are. We don't believe in Creator God, or at least I don't. And it would have been better to be Christian and to be guided by Jesus or the Holy Spirit or Omnipresent Father than to be there after 40 years of practice. So as I was thinking of giving this speech in the practice, during the practice that I just did, I kind of just had for a moment, recognition that I could feel that Shunko has taken rebirth already. It's been a year and a half, so it usually happens quite quickly for samsaric beings. 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, and they are again taking new body and new rebirth. So there you have it, really. And there you also can see that the importance of devotion. Because if you're relying on your own power, only, you're not receiving like a support from masters or the Buddhas. You're not really receiving it. While it can be the other way around also, that if one is relying only on external power, then you might not take your own responsibility. And we have the responsibility because we have karma, right? So usually, like for example, in these two schools of Japanese Buddhism, like Zen Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism, you can see kind of extreme examples of these two. But why not combine the two? This is sort of like in Buddhism, there is the endless tug of war between which one should it be, gradual enlightenment or sudden enlightenment. Like there are in Japan, there are 3 Zen schools, and Soto Zen Buddhists, they don't give emphasis to Kensho or awakenings, Bumi openings at all, while in Rinzai, they are all about Kensho. So the other camp says that it's gradual, and the other camp says that it's sudden, while both are true. What's the point of that, you know? But that's, I think, again, an indication of when usually men, when they start doing something in a closed monastic setting, and they have hundreds of years time, they come up with stuff like that. And it's always men. Have you ever heard women, a tradition that has been kept by women who have done some such like a black and white decisions? I haven't. So but even if like people here know, every one of us has had at least one kensho, at least one insight that results to some degree of clarity of mind. And some of us here have had a dozen of them or more. So still, through having many kenshos while practicing, like having sudden awakenings, sudden enlightenments, and combining that with gradual practice, gradual enlightenment, still none of us here are Buddhas. So even if you combine the two, you have to have a lot of kenshos and practice, put in the hours and effort of practice to get even close to that attainment. Isn't that interesting? It kind of makes you think, right? So I think it only makes sense that it makes sense to practice because there's an effect through that. It makes sense to have devotion, although not over emotional devotion, but devotion as in devotion means like a commitment and open-mindedness to receive the teachings, and then the effort, of course, open-heartedness as well, sincerity, honesty, and then practice. Practicing is also like an example of devotion or a commitment.
Sorry,
Yes.
what is devotion in suomeksi?
Antaumus. So yeah, what was I talking about? I was talking about devotion, things you need to have. So another thing that is an absolute requirement is to know what you're doing. Like a clearly defined map and practice instructions that helps you to understand what you're doing, where you are and where you're going at, and the goal and how you get there. Yesterday I mentioned in the speaking of non-dualism and how some non-dualist approaches, like Soto Zen, how it's like a very steep path, like climbing the
cliff face.
Sorry?
Oh, cliff face.
Yeah, like climbing a cliff without any instruction or any gear. It simply doesn't work that way, and Shunko is a unfortunately good example of this. That if you don't have clearly defined, clear definitions and valid instructions in separating mind from the nature of mind, you end up in trouble, which is exactly what the Dzogchen masters have said throughout the centuries. I've been writing this blog text with a headline Me, Zen and Japan. I've been recently writing like sort of biographical texts a little bit, and I was going to say something about the text, but what was it that I mentioned there? Yeah, I mentioned in that text, I suppose this talk is a bit mystical than before, because I was mentioning of helping dead people and how to do that, and now I'm mentioning previous lives. So I don't remember. I remember I have the sense that I've had many previous lives, not only as a human being, but in other forms. And I remember many of my past lives as a Buddhist practitioner and as a teacher and as a master and as a yogi, and also as a practitioner in many other traditions in all around the world. And I'm just saying this because I'm often saying things like critical things about, in this talk, about Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen, and how Rinzai Zen masters, how they don't give, if we look at the case of Shunko, they simply don't give valid enough instructions. But I'm saying this really with love and with concern and care about Shunko and others like him. I haven't mentioned, of course, I've been criticizing myself firstly, but others publicly for several years. So I've been analyzing, and because through my analysis have noticed that okay, there's problem here and here and here and here and here. So these need to be fixed for these systems to work. But I've never really said it directly that I feel this concern because I've been involved in all these traditions before. So it's not like I'm pointing the mistakes of others, like you have it's terrible mistake. No. It's not like that. I'm not pointing fingers because I really feel that I'm still practicing in the same community that I've been practicing for many lives. So I haven't really said this before, but now I have. There are some questions here. Yes. Now. These are really good questions. I think I will save these questions for tomorrow because I have a good quote for tomorrow's talk. So I will save them tomorrow because they go together. So I think this is my Dharma talk for today. And let's sit for about 20 minutes more together.